Hey, lecture A4. Alrighty. We're past sensory memory, and I want to talk about what I'm going to colloquially call working memory quite a bit, but the textbook first calls it immediate memory, then calls it working memory, and on the first figure I showed you, I call it short-term memory because originally that's what it was called. So what I hope you get out of this lecture is a sense of, first of all, why it's had this identity crisis of a sort, why we now refer to it more as working memory than as immediate memory. And also, I want you to have a really good sense of what this little beast is and the role, the function that it serves. And really, when we get into the function that it serves, let me just throw this up here. I'm not going to answer this right now, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this right now, but I'm going to ask you to think about answering it. How high could you reach while sitting on the back of a camel? Imagine you were asked that. Now, this is a question you've probably never been asked before, and therefore it's not an answer you can just pull out of your memory, right? If I asked you what 6 times 7, you could just pull 42 out of your memory because you've encountered that problem before, you've solved it, and now you have the answer in memory. But every now and then we encounter problems that we have not encountered before. And in order to solve those problems, then we use working memory. So this is why we will, get to the point of working memory. This is the role it's going to play. Now, I've linked this to you before, and I'm going to do this link right off the bat. And that's the link to consciousness, because it's going to be, all through all of this. I've told you before that a role of consciousness is helping us learn to behave in situations where we haven't already acquired habits, where it's a new context for us. I've talked about swinging a cricket mallet or something if you've never done it before. And this is where you ask people, how do I do that? You watch how people do it, and then you originally very consciously try. But then after a while, your conscious attempts give way to habits, which ultimately become smoother, etc. But at the beginning, when you don't know what you're doing, or when you're faced with a challenge you haven't faced before, that seems to be a role that where consciousness comes in. And that's where I differ, for example, from people like B.F. Skinner, who says, I don't know what consciousness does. Well, that's what I think consciousness does, at least one of the things that it's important for. And so I'm going to talk you through this working memory component, and we're going to come back to this question. And I'll talk to you, we'll talk about how some of the various parts of it relate to what I'm going to tell you about. But I would ask you, you might want to pause for a second and try to come up with an answer to this question. But while you do, attend to what's happening in your mind. I think when you do, a lot of the things we talk about will resonate with you. Now, I'm suddenly remembering I had some stimuli here. Yes, okay, cool. Excellent, let's go on. All right, so now all too well this little beast. This is the Atkinson and Shiffrin's so-called modal of memory. By the way, why is it called the model of memory? Just to make life tough on people like me, maybe. But no, a mode is the most frequently occurring data set. And so as people were talking about memory when they were doing research, Atkinson and Shiffrin, what they really realized is this is the sort of framework most of the people seem to be assuming. And so they called it the modal, or the most typical model of memory. So that they didn't sort of propose this out of the blue and say, hey, here's our view of how memory works. Rather, people were just talking about memory a lot. And they said, okay, when we actually think about it, this is what people are kind of implying. And so they kind of stretched it out. Now, we've talked about sensory memory a fair amount. We're going to go over here now, short-term memory, and and focus on this. Now, I told you again, the textbook calls this immediate memory or working memory, and I will stick mostly to these labels. I'll try not to, add the extra confusion of the third. So we'll talk immediate and working memory, but it's really all the same thing. And what I'm really going to do is unpack this. So they show this little rehearsal thing here. But not without a whole lot of comment. Since this modal memory, since Atkinson and Shiffrin put this out, a guy named Baddeley really focused on this, and he's the one that ultimately called it working memory, and he kind of deconstructed it. He said, let's go into that box and let's think about that box in more detail. So that's what we're going to do in this lecture, okay? And I want to talk to you about some of the aspects of it as we go. So, first of all, there will be something we're going to call the visual spatial Scratchpad. I almost should have done something differently, but It's okay. I've done it this way. I'll show you what I mean. So let's just start here. And this is going to connect with an idea we call imagery, visual imagery. This is the example they give in the textbook, and I like this one. I use this one a lot myself as well. So let's start here. Think of some house or a small building that you know well, perhaps even the one you grew up in, or even the home you are in now. Okay, something that's just not too big. Think of, a 3-bedroom home or something like that. I'm going to ask you a different question than the textbook asked you. So you ready? How many doors are inside this building? Don't worry about the doors leading out, but within the building itself, how many doors are there? Let me give you a second. While you're trying to answer that question, what's happening in your mind? So what most people would say is that mentally they travel into that building, and you probably start on one of the floors and you walk around and you kind of look for doors. And so if I do that on my, let's say, the basement, there's no, oh yes, there are doors in the basement. See, I'm doing that. There's one to the closet, and there's one to the little cubby hole. No, two to the cubby hole under the stairs. So I can now see 3 doors in the basement. If I come up to my main floor, if I don't count the doors leading out, then there are none. It's a relatively open floor plan. And now if I go up to the top floor where the bedrooms are, and I can see myself walking up the stairs, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then in our bedroom to the bathroom, 7. So 7 plus 3, there's 10 doors inside my house. Okay. Hopefully you can do something the same. But what do you experience? I described physically being there and walking around and looking around. And I think we all agree that we're kind of doing that, but we're not doing that. And this is the tricky thing with things like imagery. You're not hallucinating, right? It's not like you've put on VR goggles and, well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. This is the thing, right? It is kind of like you have VR goggles and you're walking around seeing things, but it's not reality. It's something in your mind that is sort of like visual perception, but isn't. In fact, if we looked at your occipital lobes, we would see activation. So there is something visual about that, but of course there's no activation in your optic path, the whole route from your retina to your brain. There's nothing going on there, but at the brain there is a little bit. Okay, so this is called what badly called the visual spatial Scratchpad. So he ended up saying this thing called short-term memory and that other thing, or immediate memory, is actually a collection of processes that we can use and that we use to solve problems. Like, how tall can you reach sitting on a camel? And one of the things is this so-called visual spatial Scratchpad. This place in our mind where we can kind of imagine things and combine things, but more visual sorts of stuff, which are really great for visual problems, like how many doors are inside a building. Okay, so that's one of the things that's there for us. Let me give you just one other example, to give you a feel of how you might use that. There's a guy named Ian Begg at McMaster University that did a lot of work on this, and one of the things he focused on was this so-called F test, where he would say, see a capital letter F, a big block letter F, and I want you to imagine you are at the lower left corner of that, looking sort of up the long arm of the left side of the F, and you're going to travel now up the F and then across, and I want you to tell me every turn you make. And so you would go up, and then you go right, and then you go right again, and then you go right again, and then you go left, and then you go left, and then you go right, and then you go right, and then you go left, and then you go right, and you're back to the starting point, right? So you can do that with any letter you imagine. The F was the famous one that was being used. Again, to solve a problem like that, we use imagery. And so that's one of the things available to us. As you'll see, often we combine these things. So I'm just trying to walk you through. So let's just go with that one for now. Visual spatial Scratchpad. Cool. Now, what about the voice inside your head? So let's have a little bit of experience like this, give you a taste. So I'm going to give you a list of numbers, and I'm just going to read them aloud. And what I want you to do is just listen. I'm going to stop at some point, but I'll just stop and I'll be quiet. And then I'll say go. Once I say go ahead to write the numbers down or say them out loud or do whatever. But don't do that until I say go. And what I want you to pay attention to is what's happening in your mind, all along probably, but especially in that period between when I stop and when I say go. What's actually happening in your mind? All right, you ready? So here's the numbers. 12, 47. Those aren't the right numbers. Sorry. Yeah, I got the right numbers now. Sorry. Scratch that. Ready? Here we go. We're starting fresh. 12, 7, 32, 21, 5, 8, 3. Go. What was happening in your head? It was probably 12, 7, 32, 21, 5, 8, 3. 12, 7, 32, 21, 5, 8, 3. 12, 7, 32, 21, 5, 8, 3. I'm checking again. So if you were able to hold on to all of those, and that's 7, and as I'll describe to you, 7 can be a challenge. So some of you may have found that you couldn't hold on to all of them, but these are the numbers I gave you. The important thing for this demonstration is that I'm sure what you noticed is that you were repeating these over and over in your mind. Repeating them. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean the voice inside your head. So over here, another component of this working memory system is what badly called the phonological loop. And sometimes we talk about this as the articulatory loop. Subvocal articulation is a term. So when we hear those voices in our head, in fact, if we looked at your vocal cords, we'd see a little bit of activity there. It is almost like we are talking to ourselves from our Broca's area to our Wernicke's area, that literally we're exchanging information in our head, verbal-like information. And we can use that to hold on to something. So now let's connect with this term immediate memory. And you'll have a sense, this is a kind of situation where I said, hey, remember these numbers. And I'm not asking you to retrieve them from memory. I'm asking you to hold on to them. Keep them there. Keep them alive. And that's why it's considered immediate memory, because it's right there. And you can just give the output as soon as I ask you to. But it's not about storing something and bring it back. It's about keeping it alive right after you hear it. And that's why it was originally called immediate memory. And one of the ways we do that is through what we call the articulatory loop. We literally repeat this thing as a loop over and over in our head. And we'll do that quite a lot when we want to remember something. You probably do that with definitions. The independent variable is the variable the experiment manipulates. The independent variable is the variable the experiment manipulates. You say it over and over and over again in your head, and you're hoping it'll go to your long-term memory, which we'll get to. We're going to talk all about getting things into long-term memory eventually. But for now, let's just think about working memory. So we have these two tools. We have a visual spatial Scratchpad. We can do some imagery work with this space. We have a phonological loop, so we can speak to ourselves, and we can use the loop just to keep things alive, or we can just sort of store important information that we have in an acoustic store. You'll get a sense of that as well. But just for now, let me have that sense that we have imagery and we have now words, the ability to talk to ourselves. So one of the questions that's come up when people think about this phonological loop is what's its capacity? How many things can we hold? And I already kind of implied to you that I gave you 7 here, and 7's a little tricky. Well, how many can you hold? It's a funny kind of question. So the textbook, for example, says you can hold information forever in this memory. All you have to do is keep repeating this to yourself over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. As long as you keep repeating it, it will always be there. However, that's not practical. And in fact, one of the things you'll see, and that I want to show you right now, is that information in this working memory is very fragile. We've talked about a stream of consciousness before, and how information that's there in your mind can suddenly not be there, and your mind can go somewhere else. Let's talk about that a little more specifically in the context of this phonological loop. So, I forgot I did it right here. So what I want to do is the exact same thing again. I'm going to say a bunch of numbers. I'm going to have a period of time, and then I'll say go. But this is what's going to be different. In that period of time, I won't shut up. I shut up this time, and I let you just do it. I'm not going to shut up the second time I do it. I'm going to do stuff, but ignore what I do. Okay, just wait till I say go and then retrieve it. Okay, you ready? Here's the new set. 51, 22, 4, 17, 43, 12, 86, 91, 14, 3, 8, 2, 12, 7, go. How many did you get? These are the numbers I gave you. I bet you got a whole lot less. Why? Because this working memory is very sensitive to interference. That's how we say it. It's like this is our conscious mind. So you're trying to work on something in your conscious mind. You're going to get a sense of why it's called working memory, right? Because you're trying to hold on to it. You're trying to do something. Meanwhile, this jerk in the background is throwing other numbers at you while you're trying to remember these numbers. And it's hard not to hear those. And once you hear those, they kind of get mixed in with the ones you have and they can mess you up totally. We used to, when I worked as a bartender, and at the end of the night, we'd have to cash out. If any of you guys have cashed out, to count the cash. And it was always, someone is there counting bills, and you'd hear these jokers in the background going 32, 71, and be like, stop, I'm trying to count. But it's so hard. And so this is one of the things. This working memory is very sensitive to interference, being pulled other directions, especially if the interference is similar to what we're thinking about. And that's what I just did with you, right? You're trying to remember numbers, and I throw out numbers, and that can really mess you up. So as we tried to look at this and kind of say, okay, well, how much, so let's say we're not going to be nasty and interfere this way, but how much information can the person really hold? This is the model people have come up with, a sort of conveyor belt model of working memory. It's like it can only hold so many items. And we'll be, we can talk about what items are in just a moment. But it can only hold so many. And so if you're trying to work with, let's say originally this one was there too, and you were trying to work with those 7 memories, as you keep adding new information into working memory, it's like there's only so much it can hold. And if you try to add too much, other stuff gets lost out the other side. So it's kind of like the more you put on over here, the more you keep loading on this side of the conveyor belt, the more there's going to fall off the other side. So it seems like the question is really, how many items can it hold? And a very famous paper back in the day from Jeff Miller, he described it as the magic number 7, plus or minus 2. That depending on the individual, they can hold about 5. Some people can hold on to about 5 things and work with them. Other people are more around 9. It turns out that your span, and we can measure this, your working memory span, is highly related to your IQ. And when you kind of think of that, if you can hold on to more items in your mind and work with them, then you can literally think through more complex thoughts, more complex ideas that have more moving parts. And so that might make you, be able to come up with better solutions to problems. And so literally, this seems to be a core difference between some of us. Some of us can hold a lot of things in our mind and think about them. Others can't do that so well. And this is, the more you can do, the more intelligently and complexly you can interact with the world. Now, there's always this caveat when we talk about items. And what we mean by that is, I could give you the item. I was trying to think what the date was today. So imagine, I'm giving you numbers to remember, and I say 11, 16, 20. If you can quickly enough go, hey, wait a minute, that's today. Today is the 16th day of November, 2020. And so suddenly 11, 16, 20 can be just today's date. And so if I remember today's date, now those 3 items have become 1 item. So we call that chunking. That one of the keys to being able to think about more is being able to combine things in meaningful ways. And if you can combine them into a single thing, then that's one thing now. So some people have learned how to chunk the information they're working with. Just a minor thing. So it really seems like we can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. Okay. couple of final things, and then we're going to come back to the camel. First of all, as we're working through things and we're figuring stuff out, we're kind of experiencing it, right? We're kind of seeing things happen in our mind, seeing things become combined, and you'll really feel this in just a moment. And the idea is there's this thing called the episodic buffer, and that's where we're experiencing the episode of thinking. And so as we work with stuff, it's being held in this buffer, and that's where we see the solution coming together. Again, you'll feel that in just a second. But the last thing to mention is, of course, the central executive. And this is always a sort of tricky thing for psychology. The idea is, in order to solve a problem, and you're going to feel this again in just a second, you got to figure out, okay, what information do I need to solve that? Oh, I need to know this, and so I can consult there to get that, and I can do this, and I can bring those together and do whatever. That's the kind of thing you or I would do if we were trying to solve a problem. But the idea is that there's a someone or something inside working memory, your central executive. Remember, we think of working memory as consciousness, right? There's a feeling inside there of something that's directing the actions that are taking place. This is always a problem for psychology. We don't like having to posit a central executive. It's what we call the homunculus problem. You don't want to try to understand man by getting to a point where you have to now put a man in his head, because now homunculus is little man, by the way. So now you have to explain that man. You have to explain this man. Oh, what the heck is this thing, and where did it come from? And so it's kind of like you got back to your first problem. You'd like to be able to describe mankind and their behavior without having to refer to little men in their heads that are making decisions and directing things. But with working memory, it sure feels like some entity is directing what's going on. And that entity is what we think of probably as us, as our conscious will that's trying to solve a problem. Okay, so let's bring all of these together. How high can you reach while sitting on the back of the camel? Do you have an answer for that? Let me walk you through my answer, and I'm going to try to highlight some of these things. So the first thing would be the central executive going, how do I figure that out? Well, I might go to my visual spatial Scratchpad, and I might imagine myself sitting on a camel, maybe with my hand up. So I have a sense of the problem now, a better sense of the problem. Okay, so that's what I want to get at, is the height from the foot of the camel to the tip of my hand if I were sitting on a camel. So I'm kind of seeing that. Now as a central executive, I might say, whoa, what information do I need to figure this out? And perhaps one of the things might be, I need to know how tall a camel is. If you're sitting your butt on their back, how high is that back? That's the first thing I might like to know. Well, now I might have to go to long-term memory. We haven't talked about this too much, but I might have to consult long-term memory and say, hey, any memories of a camel I can draw on? And maybe there's like, yeah, right. I was at the zoo with the kids, and they rode on a camel. They had a little camel ride, and I was watching them ride by, and I think the camel was right about the back of the camel was right about at my eye height, I think. And so my eye height, I'm 6'3". So maybe that's about 6 feet if I round off. So I'm going to say the back of the camel is at 6 feet. Okay, now I can go back to my visual spatial Scratchpad and say, okay, so that's me. So now I got to figure out, from my butt to the top of my hand, how tall is that? And I'm going to add 6 feet to that. Well, I don't know how tall I am from my butt to my head, but I do happen to know how tall I am from my butt to the floor because we have something called an inseam when we buy our jeans, which is literally that distance, right? And so I have a 36-inch inseam, 3 feet, freaky 3 feet of legs. And I know I'm 6'3". So that tells me from my butt to the top of my head must be about 3'3". All right, so now I've got the camel, 6 feet. I've got another 3'3" to the top of my head. And so now what do I have? Well, I have this hand over my head. And so I can kind of look and I can say, oh, you know what? I think that's 2 feet. I'm going to call that 2 feet. And so I have an answer now. 6 plus 3'3" plus 2 feet, that's 11.2. 11 feet, 2 inches, something like that. That's my answer. Okay. But notice, I was talking to myself as I went through that phonological loop, phonological acoustic store. I was having various imageries that were coming to play. I was bringing information in from long-term memory and combining these things. That's the episodic buffer. And of course, there was my central executive that was organizing all of this. There you go. There's your working memory. Why is it working memory? Because it's working. Right? It's trying to solve a problem. It's very active. It's not just retrieving anything. It's literally constructing a solution that it never had before. That's the kind of thing we think working memory is very important for as we go through our life. And those are the components of it. So I hope that gave you a better sense of that part of the total story. We're going to talk about it a lot because one of the jobs of working memory, once it's figured out a solution or learned something new, is to store that information in long-term memory. You might call that studying. And so we're going to talk a lot about how you get information from your working memory, like when you're just reading about it in a textbook for the first time and thinking about it, how do you get it from there to long-term memory? And that's going to be a discussion of how do you study well in a sense. So that'll be cool. We're going to get to that. We're going to talk about long-term memory first, and then we'll talk about what we call encoding, which is getting from here to there. All right. That's it for now. Bye-bye.